Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qi Zhi. Coming up in this edition, Donald Trump has revoked dozens of executive orders by Joe Biden as he begins his second term as U.S. president. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees says thousands of trucks of aid are waiting to enter Gaza, and Hamas says it will release 4 more Israeli hostages this week under the ceasefire deal. And South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has attended the third hearing of his impeachment trial. We begin in North America. Donald Trump has revoked dozens of executive orders by his predecessor Joe Biden as he begins his second term as U.S. president. He signed a series of new orders hours after the inauguration ceremony. 2 of the orders will pull the U.S. out of the World Health Organization and the Paris Climate Accord, while another one will delay the ban on popular social media app TikTok by 75 days. The president also pardoned about 1,500 people charged in the Capitol riot on January 6, 2021. He also declared a national energy emergency, along with a national emergency at the border with Mexico. Trump took office as the 47th U.S. president on Monday. Mitch McCann reports from Washington.
Donald Trump was sworn in as the 47th President of the United States. Of course, he was the 45th President of the United States too. It was only days ago the outdoor ceremony that we've become accustomed to was cancelled because of freezing conditions here in Washington, and it was held inside the Capitol building, which is usually home to the Senate and the Chamber of Congress. Now, Donald Trump was sworn in as President. He made an inaugural address. He then made another address in the Capitol building, and many of those supporters who travelled from around the country were disappointed late last week when it was announced that this was going to be inside, because it meant that they couldn't gather outside to watch in person. However, there was one place that they could go, and that was the Capital One Arena in downtown Washington, D.C., where the local NBA basketball team plays. Now, 20,000 people fit in there, and they all lined up in those freezing conditions to try and get a seat, and they sat for most of the day, and Donald Trump arrived to a rapturous applause. He was the number one star when he arrived, you can bet, and so many people had waited a very long time to see him. They eventually did, and that's where the parade was held as well. There was a lot of fanfare for Donald Trump, but a lot of criticism for him in other parts of the country when it came to those executive orders. There has been some significant changes. It was reported that before he was sworn in, Donald Trump joked with one of his colleagues that he was going to sign executive orders until his hand was broken, and he certainly did get to work fast at that event at Capital One Arena, where he signed some executive orders, and then more at the White House. Now, some of these significant ones that you need to know about: Donald Trump has signed an order which means the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement that 196 countries have signed. He initially withdrew from that in his first term in office, and then Joe Biden, the 46th president, entered the United States back in that agreement when he came into office. Donald Trump has also signed an order signalling that the US will withdraw from the World Health Organization, but perhaps the most significant order that he signed was the pardoning of people involved in the Capitol riots. Now, that's that day that really lives in infamy here in the United States, when those rioters stormed the Capitol back in 2021. Some of those who are still in jail, they'll now be released and have their criminal convictions wiped. 1,600 of them receiving a pardon from Donald Trump within hours of him coming into office.
That was Mitch McCann in Washington. During Trump's inauguration, hundreds of protesters from anti-war groups gathered in central Washington to protest the agenda of the country's new leader. Ewan Fairclough reports.
They've arrived in their hundreds to brave freezing temperatures on this inauguration day to make their voices heard against the new Trump administration. A rainbow coalition of protesters representing people of all genders, all colours, and from some of the banners and the flags, a huge amount of solidarity with the Palestinian people and the people of Gaza, despite that ceasefire taking place between Israel and Hamas just as Donald Trump came into office. Indeed, the Trump administration taking some credit for that ceasefire. These protesters, though, are bitterly disappointed. Many of the speakers also airing their grievances against the outgoing Biden administration, asking why weren't they here for this protest march against the new Trump administration, expressing their disappointment with Democrats for their failure to keep hold of the White House. Some of the people here as well very despondent about the mood across the country. Yes, there are some 80 demonstrations taking place across the US in cities across the country against the Trump administration, but the mood is somewhat muted. People saying yes, they are feeling defeatist. Yes, they do feel that they haven't had their voices heard, but many of them saying they're going to spend the next 4 years trying to build something, trying to find their voice. But of course, it's not going to be easy for them. There are people here of all genders. Donald Trump signing an executive order on his first day in office, stating simply that the federal government recognizes only 2 genders. So you get a sense there that the Trump administration is making moves that will undermine much of the work and much of the progress that these people feel has been made in the US in recent years. These protesters are trying to get as far as they can to the White House, where Donald Trump is now the next US president. Security around them, security forces are adamant that they do not want them to get into conflict with any pro-Donald Trump supporters as well.
That was Owen Fairclough reporting. In Europe, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte has called on the alliance to shift to a wartime mindset. He was responding to Donald Trump, who made it clear to NATO members before his inauguration that they must spend more on defense. From Brussels, William Denslow sent this report.
It's a demand that dates back to his first term in office. Donald Trump's consistently argued that NATO allies in Europe don't pay their fair share when it comes to collective security. He's now calling for members of the military alliance to spend 5% of gross domestic product on defence. The current benchmark is 2%, but 8 of the 32 NATO members are falling shy of that figure. Poland, which shares a border with Ukraine, currently is the closest to that target, spending 4.1% on defence, but aims to hit 4.7% this year. Lithuania, meanwhile, has pledged to spend 5 to 6% of GDP on defence from 2026 until the end of the decade. But with economies across much of Europe spluttering, many analysts believe the 5% target is unrealistic. Senior EU officials also say that widespread tariffs, as Trump has threatened, will put those defence spending goals further out of reach. NATO Secretary-General has praised Donald Trump's commitment to increase spending and has suggested that the benchmark figure will be raised to over 3%.
To prevent war, we need to prepare for it. It's time to shift to a wartime mindset. And this means we need to make our defences even stronger by spending more on defence, producing more and better defence capabilities.
Trump assumes the presidency with war raging on Europe's doorstep. He's called for a quick resolution to the conflict in Ukraine, fueling fears here in Brussels over what that will mean for Kyiv and Europe's security more broadly. The EU's top diplomat Kaja Kallas says the bloc is willing to assume the leadership role, but Ukraine's president says Donald Trump is a man he wants to have on side.
That was William Denslow in Brussels. Turning to the Middle East, many Palestinians have gathered on the streets across Gaza to celebrate the ceasefire with Israel as more aid flows into the Strip. The UN says more than 900 aid trucks entered Gaza on Monday. Rami Amagare reports.
Atmosphere here is a very different atmosphere from the past 15 months of an Israeli war that has been devastating and has been very terrible for the population. Now the population are taken out to the streets, checking on each other, having no fear and worry of any Israeli strike whatsoever in the territory from time to then. And this situation actually of some sort of relief that the people are having is totally different from the past 15 months. But still, the situation is still the same with people are being displaced. Many of them have not been able to go back to their homes because they are battered and they are ruined because of the Israeli actions either in the northern Gaza Strip or in the southern Gaza Strip city of Rafah. Truckloads of aids have entered the territory, including a large amount of fuel entered the territory, and the prices for fuel now is getting lower than they have been in the past few days. Also, other prices of goods are getting much less than they have been in the previous days before the ceasefire was instated. Let me just here say that the people are looking forward to this ceasefire to continue, to hold, to sustain, because they are battered, they are ruined at many ways, at the educational, at the health, at the sanitation, at the food situation of every aspect of life has been badly impacted by this. And they hope that the Israel and Hamas, via mediators, will be able to embark on a sustainable and successful prisoner swap deal. That's actually the sense of the situation for the time being in the coastal enclave that has been battered because of the Israeli war that is aimed at Islamist Hamas party in Gaza.
That was Rami Al-Magari in Gaza. Meanwhile, Hamas says it will release 4 more Israeli hostages on Saturday in exchange for Palestinian detainees held in Israeli jails. The group will release over 90 hostages in the coming weeks, based on this ceasefire deal with Israel, which took effect on Sunday. Jonathan Regev has more from Tel Aviv.
Here in Israel was a happy morning, a morning of hope. All of the headlines, every newspaper you would see, all of them portraying the very happy images of the 3 female hostages coming back, reuniting with their families, and even those who oppose the deal, and there are quite substantial votes against the ceasefire deal, and with the heavy prices that Israel is paying, even those people, the ministers, the members of parliament who voted against the deal, still sent very happy tweets saying that they're happy to see the hostages returning. There's a very big debate regarding the prices that Israel has to pay, but I think that every Israeli is very happy to see 3 hostages finally coming back, and there's more hope as later in the week, possibly even on a Saturday, 4 more female hostages are meant to return. If everything goes according to plan, Israel should get 4 more names by Friday and have those 4 female hostages released by Saturday. So yes, there is controversy here in Israel. There is a debate regarding this agreement, whether Israel should have gone for it or not. But everybody, those who support the deal and those who oppose it, woke up to a very happy morning. Eventually, I think every Israeli is happy to see those 3 hostages back home, back with their families.
That was Jonathan Regev reporting in Tel Aviv. At the United Nations, the state of Palestine has called on the Security Council to push for talks toward a 2-state solution. Council members convened the meeting on Monday to discuss the Gaza ceasefire deal. Jody Jacobs has more from New York.
As the 6-week ceasefire deal in Gaza is now underway, the United Nations has described the agreement as fragile. On Monday, the UN Security Council convened a high-level meeting to discuss the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has described the Middle East as undergoing a period of profound transformation, filled with uncertainty and opportunity.
While many challenges lie ahead, we should appreciate the long overdue relief this moment provides for Palestinians in Gaza and the hostages reunited with their loved ones. We are doing our part to ensure the rapid scaling up of humanitarian deliveries.
Addressing the Council, Palestine's foreign minister called on the international community for support. She emphasized the need to reach a comprehensive, lasting solution for peace in the Middle East and the need to begin implementing previous UN Security Council resolutions and a 2-state solution.
We reiterate our total rejection of any attempts to annex our land or to displace our people. This is a blatant violation of international law. It violates the principles enshrined by the international legitimacy. We reaffirm the need or the imperative to uphold our legitimate rights and our national identity, which unites our people wherever they are in the world.
Israel says this deal is not an absolute conclusion. This moment, its representative says, is only the beginning, stressing that the war will not end until all the hostages are returned home.
This progress comes at a heavy cost. Israel has agreed to release convicted terrorists responsible for heinous crimes to bring our people home. This is a decision no nation should have to make. Yet we made it because we hold life sacred. This deal is not a conclusion. It is a step in the demanding journey to ensure the return of every single hostage.
Council members welcomed the ceasefire agreement in Gaza, but have stressed the importance of rapidly increasing humanitarian aid. They also referenced the devastation inflicted by the war and the need to reinvigorate a political process between Israel and Palestine that will ultimately lead to lasting peace.
That was Jody Jacobs at the UN headquarters in New York. Elsewhere in Asia, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has attended the third hearing of his impeachment trial. His lawyers told the Constitutional Court that Yoon never intended to execute a curfew and had no plans to do so. This is the first time in the country's modern history that an impeached president has attended a court hearing in person. Shin Ham reports from Seoul.
This hearing will largely focus on President Yoon's team trying to justify his martial law order back on December 3rd. We already heard from his lawyers saying that the president really had no intent on following through on his martial law order, and that any sort of news that has come out about his ordering of the arrest of political leaders or with the Speaker of the National Assembly are completely false. This hearing will also focus on gaining evidence and submitting evidence, and both sides will present both witnesses and evidence, and the court justices will decide whether or not to accept that into evidence. We know that this is the first time we've seen President Yoon in an official capacity since that martial law decree order. But what the president's team is arguing is that really the National Assembly and the opposition lawmakers really had a stranglehold on his political agenda, and that's why this was a national crisis and a martial law order was necessary at this point. So there won't be any witnesses being presented. We're going to continue to see hearings every Tuesday and Thursday, except for the Lunar New Year holiday. And President Yoon has already indicated that he'll be present at these hearings moving forward.
That was Shin Ham in Seoul. And finally, rescue and relief efforts are underway in Taiwan after a 6.2 magnitude earthquake struck the Chinese island. The quake hit Tainan on Tuesday, with no major casualties or significant damage to the railway, water, or electricity infrastructure so far. Health authorities reported that over 20 people across Taiwan sought medical treatment for injuries. Andy Lee reports.
Tremors were felt throughout the island of China's Taiwan. Many people were scared, including me. It lasted more than 10 seconds, and the aftershocks kept coming afterwards. Now, in the city of Tainan, several buildings were damaged. In one of the buildings, roof collapsed, walls crumbled, and many people were trapped inside. Fortunately, these people were rescued. And more fortunately was that there were no fatalities for this earthquake on the island of Taiwan. Now, in addition to buildings being damaged in the city of Tainan, factories were set ablaze in Tainan as well. And in Kaohsiung City, the water pipelines were damaged, also due to the earthquake. So, the aftermath, the city mayor of Tainan City, the city mayor, has announced that Tainan City will be having one whole day off from school and off from business. Now, the reason is for the people to be able to clean up the mess after the earthquake and for the people to conduct damage repairs. Now, this earthquake, according to local meteorologists in the island of Taiwan, many aftershocks will continue, in fact, for at least 3 more days. Now, after the shock, I was in Taipei, of the earthquake shock, I felt 6 to 7 aftershocks. It was very scary. I wasn't able to sleep for the whole night.
That was Andy Lee in Taipei. Now, recapping the headlines before we go, Donald Trump has revoked dozens of executive orders by Joe Biden as he begins his second term as U.S. president. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees says thousands of trucks of aid are waiting to enter Gaza, while Hamas says it will release 4 more Israeli hostages this week. And South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has attended the third hearing of his impeachment trial. That's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news and magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thanks for listening.